I was 15 the first time I realized my parents didn't see me as their son, at least, not in the way you'd expect a parent to see their child. To them, I was a tool, a spare, a fallback plan, in case things didn't work out with their real pride and joy. My younger brother, Owen. He was 13 at the time, a bright kid with a loud laugh and a knack for getting exactly what he wanted. I used to envy him for that, until I realized the price of being the favorite was never hearing the word no, even when he needed to. And the price of being me was being forgotten, until they needed something. My name's Henry. I'm 27 now. But this story, this disaster, really, starts years before that, when I packed a single duffel bag, slid out the back door, and left behind the peeling paint and echoing silence of a house that never really felt like home. I didn't leave because I had some grand escape plan. I left because I was tired of trying. Tired of pouring effort into a family that only ever filled my cup with guilt and obligation. I was just a kid with a part-time job at a gas station and a stack of textbooks from the public library. But somehow, walking away from everything familiar felt less terrifying than staying. I didn't expect to make it. Honestly, part of me thought I'd come crawling back within a week. But I didn't. I slept in shelters, picked up shifts wherever I could find them, and took online classes on borrowed Wi-Fi until I could afford community college. I kept my head down, worked through summers and weekends, and slowly clawed my way towards something that resembled stability. I didn't tell anyone from my old life where I was. I figured they wouldn't ask. And they didn't. Not for a long time. That's the part that always stings more than I care to admit. Not that I left, but that no one came looking. Not a call. Not a message. Not even a passing email to ask if I was alive. I could have been in a ditch or halfway across the country, and it wouldn't have mattered. I was a ghost the moment I stopped being useful. It's funny how silence says more than words ever could. But life went on. I got a job in tech after graduation, landed a decent role at a startup that later got bought out, and saved everything I could. I wasn't rich, not by Bay Area standards, but I was doing all right. I lived modestly. No flashy car. No designer clothes. Just a quiet little two-bedroom house on the edge of town with a mortgage I'd finally paid down enough to breathe. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every square foot, every light fixture, every screw in the drywall was something I'd earned. Alone. Then, out of nowhere, they called. I remember the number flashing on my screen. Unfamiliar, but vaguely familiar. Like the ghost of a memory you can't quite place. I let it go to voicemail. I stared at the little notification bubble for a full hour before I worked up the nerve to play it. Henry, this is your father. We need to talk. It's about Owen. That was it. No hello. No how are you. Just straight to business. I played it twice, just to make sure I wasn't imagining the iciness in his voice. It had been over a decade since I'd heard from them, and the first thing they said was, "We need to talk." Not, "We missed you." Not, "We're sorry." Not even a basic, "Are you okay?" I should have deleted it. Should have blocked the number and moved on like I always had. But some pathetic, wounded part of me wanted to know what they could possibly want after all this time. So I called back. "Henry," my dad said, as if he was picking up a conversation we'd only just paused. "Glad you called. Look, I'll get straight to it. Your brother's going through a rough patch." I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch. He's had some setbacks. Dropped out of college. Lost his job. Couple of bad decisions, nothing serious. But he needs a fresh start. A clean slate. My stomach tightened. I already knew where this was going. I could hear it in his tone. That edge of expectation, like a knife being slowly unsheathed. "We know you've done well for yourself," he continued. "Your mother and I talked it over, and we think it's only fair that you help. Family supports each other, right?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd it was practically surreal. "You want me to what exactly?" I said slowly. "Well, Owen's staying with us for now, but we were thinking, maybe you could give him a portion of what you have. Help him buy a place. Get on his feet. Half, maybe. You've got your house, your career. He deserves a chance too." I was quiet for a beat too long, and my dad jumped in again. "It's not like we're asking for much. Just a fair split. You're both our sons." That word, fair, rang in my ears like a siren. Fair. Like it was fair when they told me I was on my own at 15. Like it was fair when Owen got private school and tutoring while I taught myself calculus behind a gas station counter. Like it was fair when they replaced every "we love you" with "you should have been more like your brother." "Dad," I said, and my voice was calm in a way that scared even me. Are you seriously asking me to give Owen half of everything I've built? After everything. There was a pause. Then, like he hadn't heard me at all, he said, "It's not just about you, Henry. You owe your brother a future. He's family." That word again. Family. As if they hadn't shredded that idea years ago and left me to bleed out on the pavement. I hung up. That should have been the end of it. Another phone call I try to forget. Another wound to bury. But 2 weeks later, I got a knock on the door. A man in a buttoned shirt handed me a thick envelope and said, "You've been served." I opened it, hands shaking, and felt the world tilt beneath me. It was a civil claim, filed by my parents, on behalf of Owen. They were suing me. Their argument? That as his older brother, someone who'd benefited from family support and emotional labor, I nearly choked on that part. I was morally and financially obligated to provide Owen with half my assets. They cited familial expectation, unfair enrichment, and intentional alienation. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so utterly deranged. But the worst part wasn't the papers. It wasn't the legal jargon or the nerve of it all. It was the attached statement from Owen. Typed. Signed. "I believe my brother has a duty to share what he has. Our parents always said we'd be equals." I trusted that. I trusted him. As if I'd betrayed him. As if I owed him anything. I sat on my porch for hours after that, the envelope limp in my lap, my coffee gone cold beside me. I thought of every night I spent hungry, every shift I took to afford books, every time I'd sat in the back row of a lecture hall with secondhand clothes and dollar store pens while Owen got new backpacks and name-brand shoes and a ride to school every morning. And now they wanted half. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Hardened. Because if they were going to drag me into court and paint me as the villain, then I was going to make sure they regretted ever putting my name in their mouths. But I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to explain myself. No, I was going to show them exactly who I'd become without them. And I had a plan. I just needed to wait for the right moment to strike. And that moment? It came the day I walked into the courtroom, sat alone at my table, and saw their faces when the judge asked if the defendant had prepared a closing statement. I stood. I cleared my throat. And I read every word I'd written. That was the moment their faces turned pale. That was the moment Owen stopped looking me in the eye. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened first. Let me show you exactly how far they went, and how I made sure they'd never forget it. They say you can't miss what you never had. But that's a lie. Because even after all these years, after everything I'd survived and built on my own, there was still a small, aching part of me that longed for a family that cared. Not a perfect one. Not even a good one. Just one that acknowledged I existed beyond what I could provide. I guess that's what made the betrayal sting more than I thought it would. Not just because of what they were doing, but because of who they still saw me as. A wallet. A workhorse. A backup plan. The days after the lawsuit was filed felt like walking through molasses. I wasn't panicking, not outwardly, but I couldn't focus on anything. My work performance dipped. I barely touched my food. I started checking my locks twice a night. Not because I was scared of them showing up, but because I felt violated, invaded. My sanctuary, my home, the one thing I had truly earned, was suddenly under siege by the very people who'd abandoned me. I didn't respond to the claim right away. I waited, watched, tried to see if it was some kind of bluff, a twisted scare tactic. Maybe they'd come to their senses. Maybe they'd realize how insane it all sounded. But a week later, I got another envelope, this time from their attorney. A formal notice of the hearing date, accompanied by documentation to support their case. Emails, texts, photos of our childhood, school report cards, even a single, blurry picture of me standing next to Owen at some backyard barbecue when we were kids, like it proved we'd been close. Like it meant anything. I read every page. And with every sentence, every manipulative half-truth, my blood pressure rose a little more. They had rewritten our entire history. I wasn't the kid who ran away because he was abandoned. I was the ungrateful son who cut off contact. Owen wasn't the golden child who coasted through life. He was the misguided little brother who'd always looked up to me. My parents? Oh, they were saints. Heartbroken. Always hoping I'd come back. Always waiting with open arms. Except they never once tried to find me. Never once asked why I left. Never once reached out. Not until it became convenient for them. It wasn't just insulting. It was dangerous. They were crafting a narrative that made me look like a cold, selfish adult who'd simply gotten lucky and decided to hoard it. And Owen, poor Owen, the victim of an emotionally distant older brother who had the means to help and simply refused. I wanted to scream, but instead I wrote. I started keeping a journal, at first just to organize my thoughts for court, but it quickly became more than that. A lifeline, a mirror, a reminder that I wasn't crazy. I filled page after page with memories. Real ones. Sharp, detailed, painful. Like the time I'd asked for new shoes in ninth grade because mine had holes, and my mom said, maybe if you didn't drag your feet so much, they'd last longer. Then, 3 days later, they bought Owen a pair of Jordans for doing well on his math quiz. For my 16th birthday, I'd saved up to buy myself a small ice cream cake. Left it in the freezer, planning to eat it after my shift. I came home to find it half-eaten, with Owen's name carved into it in frosting. I figured you bought it for the family, my mom had said with a shrug when I confronted her. It's not a big deal. Except it was. Every small thing added up. Every dismissal, every silent shrug, every time they made me feel like an afterthought. It had all been groundwork for this moment. And now that I was no longer a quiet, invisible kid, but a man with something they wanted, they were rewriting it all. That was the breaking point. Not the lawsuit itself. Not even Owen's signed statement. It was the realization that they still didn't see me. Not really. They saw a resource. A missed opportunity. A safety net. But never Henry. Not the son who slept on benches between shifts. Not the teenager who carried 2 jobs and still showed up to night classes. Not the man who taught himself how to fix plumbing because he couldn't afford to call someone when his rental bathroom flooded. They saw what I had, not how I got it. And that's when I decided I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd make this hurt. Not out of spite. Not even out of revenge. But because they needed to understand that I wasn't theirs to manipulate anymore. That night, I made a decision. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 10 years, Miss Carter, my high school guidance counselor. She'd been the only adult who ever truly believed me when I told her things weren't right at home. The one who pulled strings to get me meal vouchers when I was couch surfing. Who slipped me bus passes without making a scene. Who printed college applications for me behind the library desk and let me use the office phone to call shelters. I found her email through the school district site and sent a message I thought would go unanswered. But 2 days later, I got a reply. Henry, I never forgot about you. Call me. We spoke for an hour. By the end of it, she'd agreed to write a statement. Sworn. Signed. Dated. A full account of my final year in school. What I'd been through. What she'd witnessed. The time she tried to contact my parents, and they brushed her off. The teachers who pooled money to buy me a cap and gown for graduation. The time she found me asleep in the school supply closet because I hadn't had anywhere else to go. It wasn't just a character statement. It was proof. Proof that they hadn't supported me. Proof that I'd done this alone. I felt like I could finally breathe. But of course, the universe wasn't done testing me. Because a week before the hearing, I got an unexpected visit. It was Owen. He showed up unannounced, wearing joggers, a designer hoodie, and sneakers I could never afford at his age. He had the same crooked smile I remembered from when we were kids, the one that used to mean, I'm about to get away with something. Hey man, he said casually, like this wasn't the first time we'd spoken in over a decade. Can we talk? I didn't open the door all the way, just leaned against the frame. What do you want? He shrugged. Look, I know the lawsuit's kinda intense, but it's not personal. Mom and Dad just think it's the right thing. You know how they are. I said nothing. He went on. I'm not trying to take your life or anything. I just need a leg up. A clean slate. I messed up. Yeah, but you've got so much. I mean, come on, this place. You've got your own house. You probably make 6 figures. It was the way he said it. Like it was all handed to me. Like I'd spun a wheel and landed on a jackpot. Let me ask you something, I said, my voice low. Where were you when I was sleeping in a shelter on Mission and 8th? When I was walking 6 miles to class because I couldn't afford the bus? He blinked. I didn't know about any of that. Exactly, I said. Because you never asked. He shifted uncomfortably. Okay, but still. You're in a position to help. Isn't that what family does? There it was. The same script. The same guilt. Only now, it was coming from my brother instead of my parents. I did help you, I said. By leaving. By not dragging you down with me. By surviving without ever asking you for a damn thing. He stared at me for a long time. Then said quietly, You really think you're better than us now, huh? I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I didn't know what to say. Was I better than them? Maybe not. But I was different. I'd chosen a harder path, walked it alone, and I wasn't about to apologize for where it led me. He left after that. No handshake, no hug, just a bitter glance over his shoulder and the slam of a car door. A few days later, I got the final pre-hearing packet from their lawyer. They doubled down, included a new affidavit from my parents, full of lies, embellishments, proof that I'd been emotionally unstable, that I'd severed ties without cause, that I was now punishing Owen out of jealousy. I should have been angry, should have thrown something, but I didn't. I just sat down, opened a blank document, and started typing. My final statement, the one I'd read aloud in court. And as I wrote, I didn't just think about defending myself. I thought about exposing them. Because they wanted a performance? Fine. I'd give them one they'd never forget. I didn't realize how heavy the past was until I started digging it up. Writing that final statement for court forced me to relive moments I'd long buried just to survive. It wasn't just paperwork or legal prep. It was therapy by fire. Each paragraph felt like a scalpel, slicing into years of numbness. And once the numbness wore off, the pain came rushing in like floodwater behind a broken dam. I wasn't okay. Not for a while. After Owen's visit, something shifted. His words clung to me like smoke. Isn't that what family does? But family never shielded me. They fed me to the wolves and called it tough love. I stopped sleeping. My appetite tanked. I'd sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets for hours, unable to focus, until I'd shut my laptop and just sit. Still, frozen, drowning in the eerie silence of a house I'd once felt proud to own. Now, it felt more like a bunker. A fortress built out of fear. One night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. Pale, unshaven, eyes rimmed red from too many nights of pretending I wasn't falling apart. I pressed my palm against the cold tile and whispered, "You're not going back there. You're not going back." But I felt like I already had. The emotional toll of the lawsuit was worse than I ever expected. Because it wasn't just a legal matter, it was my childhood on trial. And I didn't have a family standing behind me. No support system. No Sunday dinners. No concerned aunt or warm cousin or godparent offering to testify. Just me. Again, I tried calling a therapist, but their earliest available slot was 4 weeks out. I considered canceling, but something told me to hold on. Instead, I went to the park near my old college campus. Sat on the same worn bench I used to eat instant noodles on during lunch breaks, back when I had $20 in my bank account and a cracked iPhone. I looked around at the students passing by, backpacks slung over shoulders, eyes full of stress and ambition. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel envy or resentment. I felt pride. I'd done that. And more. With no safety net. No trust fund. No letters of recommendation from Dad's golf buddy. Just grit. That day marked a subtle but powerful shift. I wasn't out of the woods, not even close. But I remembered who I was. What I'd survived. What I'd built. And more importantly, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. A real one. Stamped. Handwritten. It was from Ms. Carter, my old guidance counselor. She'd included a copy of the statement she was submitting to the court, but that wasn't what got me. At the bottom, in her familiar, looping cursive, she'd written, "You were always more than they could see. Don't let them shrink your worth just because they couldn't grow theirs." I read it 4 times. Then I stuck it to my fridge with a magnet, right next to a faded photo of me at my college graduation, the one I'd attended alone, with a borrowed cap and a paper gown that didn't quite fit. That photo used to make me feel hollow. Now, it reminded me I was real. That night, I dusted off my resume. Not because I needed a new job, but because I wanted to see it. Everything I'd done. Every promotion. Every project. Every risk that paid off. I realized I had become someone remarkable, and no one in my family even knew my job title. I don't think they even knew what company I worked for. To them, I was still Henry the dropout. Henry the difficult one. Henry the selfish runaway. But that wasn't me anymore. I was Henry, senior product manager at a mid-sized tech firm. Homeowner. Debt-free. Mentor to 3 interns. Volunteer at a local adult literacy nonprofit. A man with a future he forged from scrap. And no lawsuit was going to take that from me. With renewed focus, I got to work. Quietly. Strategically. I didn't rant on social media. Didn't tell coworkers. Didn't vent in Slack channels or group chats. I rebuilt from the inside. I hired a lawyer. Not flashy, but sharp. A woman named Rajani who'd spent 10 years defending clients from frivolous family claims. When I explained my case, she paused for a long time and said, "This is disgusting. But don't worry. We're not just going to defend. We're going to dismantle." She helped me refine my statement. We cross-referenced every fact in their complaint and compiled a binder of counter-evidence. Bank records from when I was 15, pay stubs, rental history, photos of me working graveyard shifts, text messages, or the lack thereof. We even tracked down my old roommate from the shelter. Turns out he'd turned his life around too. He worked maintenance at a hospital now and was more than willing to vouch for the nights I came home after 12-hour shifts and studied under a flickering light bulb for exams that no one thought I'd pass. It felt like assembling an army of ghosts, pieces of my past rising to fight beside me. But the biggest turning point came from someone I never expected. My landlord from my first real apartment. I'd rented a tiny, roach-infested studio when I was 19. The guy barely spoke English, but he always called me hard-working boy. I reached out on a whim, asking if he remembered me. He did. And not only did he remember, I found out he'd saved a copy of the thank you note I left when I moved out. "You pay on time," he wrote in a short affidavit. "Fix toilet yourself. Quiet. Good heart." I laughed when I read it, through tears, because somehow, that mattered more than all the shiny job titles. That was who I was. A good-hearted kid who paid his rent on time and fixed his own toilet. Not the entitled brother they painted in court papers. As the hearing date crept closer, I started sleeping again, eating again. I went back to the gym. Nothing fancy, just stretching, lifting light, reclaiming control of my body the same way I was reclaiming my voice. People at work noticed the shift. "You seem lighter," one coworker said. I nodded. "Just cleaning house," I replied. They didn't know what I meant, but I did. The day before the hearing, I took off work and drove to the edge of town. There's a lake out there. Nothing big, just a quiet place with weeping willows and creaky docks. I used to walk there after my shifts in college, back when I didn't have air conditioning and needed somewhere cool to breathe. I stood on the dock and stared at the water, then pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. It was the letter I wrote the night I left home at 15. I'd carried it with me for 12 years. Never showed it to anyone. It was angry, messy, childish, full of scratched-out curses and broken grammar. But it was real. I read it once more, then let it fall into the water. I watched the ink bleed, the paper dissolve. It didn't fix anything, didn't change the past, but it felt like permission to stop carrying guilt that was never mine, to stop explaining myself to people who never listened, to stop waiting for an apology I was never going to get. The next morning, I woke up early, showered, shaved, and put on the Navy suit I'd worn to my first tech conference. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because it reminded me of who I'd become. I looked in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and whispered, "Let's end this." The courtroom wasn't what I expected. Smaller, quieter, no gavel, just a judge, a few rows of benches, and the quiet shuffling of paperwork. My parents sat at one table, Owen beside them, looking bored, like this was some minor inconvenience on the way to brunch. Their lawyer, a smug guy with slicked back hair, nodded at me like we were playing a friendly game of poker. I took my seat. Alone. No family behind me. No friends in the gallery. But I didn't feel alone anymore. I had my story, my truth, my proof. And when the judge called my name and asked if I had a closing statement, I stood, pulled the papers from my folder, cleared my throat, and said, "Yes, Your Honor, I do." I looked up, right at my parents, right at Owen, their faces already beginning to shift. But I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for the boy who used to sleep in borrowed hoodies and wonder if anyone would ever notice if he disappeared. I took a breath and began to speak. The courtroom fell into a hush the second I opened my mouth. It was one of those silences that doesn't happen by accident. It landed, thick, heavy, expectant. No papers rustled. No chair squeaked. Even the bailiff paused mid-shift. The judge looked at me over her glasses, pen poised just above her legal pad. She had that expression, half curious, half bored, but I could tell she'd heard enough rambling closing statements in her life to know when something different was about to start. I didn't shout. I didn't grandstand. I didn't pace the room like some primetime legal drama. I just stood behind the little table, my hands resting lightly on the edge, and spoke clearly. "My name is Henry Marshall. I'm 27 years old. I own a home, I have a steady job, no criminal record, and zero debt. I pay my taxes, I donate to the food bank down the street, and every holiday season, I go back to the shelter I used to sleep in and drop off blankets. I glanced up. Owen shifted in his seat. My father crossed his arms. My mother didn't blink. I say all that not to impress you, I continued, but because I need to establish something that's apparently been lost in all this legal paperwork. I built this life. Alone. I wasn't handed it. I didn't inherit it. There was no college fund. No down payment from a generous uncle. No cosigner. No financial safety net. Everything I have, I earned. My voice didn't shake. I had practiced too many times for that. But that's not what this case is about, is it? This isn't about fairness. This isn't about family. This is about control. About a family that ignored me for a decade until they realized I had something they wanted. The judge leaned back slightly. I could feel my parents' attorney squirming, itching to object. But there was nothing objectionable yet. I reached down, pulled a page from my folder. This is a statement from Ms. Linda Carter, my high school guidance counselor. She testifies that I was effectively homeless at 15, that my parents were unresponsive when contacted about my welfare, and that I survived on free lunch vouchers and secondhand clothes from school donations. I held up another. This is from Mr. Stanley Valdez, my former landlord. He confirms I worked 3 jobs to pay rent on a 200-square-foot apartment with no heating and fixed the plumbing myself because I couldn't afford repairs. Another. This one's from George Peters, who ran the community shelter where I lived for 3 months. He remembers me coming home from work with cracked hands and study guides, falling asleep at the dining table because I had midterms the next morning. I look directly at Owen now. And this is the receipt from the day I bought my house. Paid the down payment myself. Signed the contract alone. No gifts. No loans. Just years of labor and a credit score I earned inch by inch. Now the silence in the room was different. Not tense. Electric. The judge raised her eyebrows. My lawyer didn't smile. She didn't need to. The work was being done. I could have ended the statement there. That would have been enough to win the case. But I wasn't interested in just winning. This was the setup. So I kept going. You know what's funny? I said, tone still calm. Not once. Not once. In the 12 years I've been gone, did anyone here ask how I was doing? No calls. No letters. Not even a birthday text. But the moment Owen needed a house, suddenly I'm family again. My father shifted, annoyed. My mother's mouth was a flat, hard line. I'm not angry that I wasn't helped. I added. That's life. You play the hand you're dealt. I learned that young. What I am angry about is the rewriting of history. The idea that I owe something to people who never even acknowledged my pain, let alone lifted a finger to ease it. I paused, letting the weight of that settle. Then I folded the pages, slid them back into my folder, and looked at the judge. I respectfully asked that this lawsuit be dismissed with prejudice. Not because I think I'm better than them, but because I refuse to let the people who left me behind profit from my survival. The judge looked stunned for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and said, "Thank you, Mr. Marshall." And just like that, the moment was over. But the real story, the one that matters, starts after that. Because I didn't walk out of that courtroom feeling triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt hollow, like I'd spent all this time preparing for war, only to realize I was still bleeding from battles I thought I'd buried years ago. But then something strange happened. After the hearing, as I was gathering my things, my parents didn't come up to me. They didn't say a word. But Owen? He stood by the exit, staring at the floor, hands jammed into his pockets. When I passed him, he mumbled, "You didn't have to do that." I stopped, slowly turned toward him. Didn't have to do what? Defend myself from being sued by my own brother. His jaw clenched. I just meant, you made me look like a fool. I stared at him for a long moment, then said softly, "No, Owen. You made yourself look like a fool. I just stopped covering for you. And then I left. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought they'd slink off and stew in silence. But 3 days later, I got an email. Not from Owen. Not from my parents. From their lawyer. It was cold. Clinical. A single sentence stood out. "Please be advised your family intends to appeal." I stared at the screen for nearly 5 minutes. Then I laughed. Not bitterly. Not hysterically. Just laughed. Because it was absurd. They were still trying to dig. Still trying to claim something that didn't belong to them. And that's when I knew. Defending myself wasn't enough. I had to end this. For good. But to do that, I needed leverage. So I made a list. Not of people I hated. Not of things I wanted to say. A list of every loose thread my family had ever left behind. The debts they forgot. The lies they whispered. The skeletons they buried because they assumed I was too far gone to dig them up. I called in favors. Dug through public records. Searched through online databases with quiet precision. And slowly, a pattern emerged. One that went far deeper than I ever realized. Turns out my parents had taken out a second mortgage years ago. One they defaulted on and quietly rolled into a consolidation loan under my mother's name. A loan that, because of a clerical error, listed me as a co-signer. I had no idea. I was 17 at the time. That alone could have been a bombshell. But it didn't stop there. Owen, his fresh start, wasn't some recent downer. He'd burned through 3 jobs in 2 years, been evicted from 2 apartments, and had multiple credit cards maxed out under his name, plus one under an authorized user profile with my dad's account. I started compiling everything. Printouts, spreadsheets, legal documents. I cross-referenced timestamps. Contacted a consumer protection attorney. Then I filed a counterclaim. But I didn't serve it yet. No, I wanted to wait. Because timing is everything. And revenge, real, satisfying revenge, isn't just about winning. It's about making sure they know exactly why they lost. So I began setting the stage. I quietly sent an anonymous tip to a local financial blog about a potential case of parental financial fraud involving a fake co-signer. Just vague enough to pique interest. Just juicy enough to keep them digging. I booked a consultation with a forensic accountant. And I reached out to Ms. Carter again. This time not for help, but for advice. You don't have to become like them to get justice, she said. But you do have to be strategic. She was right. So I made sure every move I made was legal, airtight, and documented. And when the appeal date was finally set, I smiled. Because this time, I wasn't walking into court alone. This time, I was ready to burn it all down. On my terms. The morning of the appeal, I woke up before my alarm. I don't know if it was adrenaline or peace, but I felt, still, no anxiety, no second-guessing. Just a quiet certainty in my bones that today was the day it ended. Not just the lawsuit, but the grip my family had on my life. The invisible leash I'd been dragging behind me since the age of 15. I slipped into the same navy suit, straightened my cuffs, smoothed my tie. But this time, I wasn't dressing for defense. This wasn't about protecting what I had. It was about taking back everything they thought they could twist. Rajani, my lawyer, met me on the courthouse steps. She greeted me with a nod and handed over a sleek black folder. Everything's in here, she said. We've confirmed the fraud. The counterclaim is active. Judge Peters has already reviewed it in pre-hearing. And the journalist? I asked. She smirked. They'll be sitting 2 rows behind your mother. Perfect. The hearing room was the same as last time. Bland walls, worn wooden furniture. But it didn't feel small anymore. It felt like a stage. And today, the lights were pointed at them. My parents entered first, trailed by Owen. This time, there was no smug lawyer. He dropped them the moment Rajani filed the counterclaim. Apparently, he didn't sign up for financial fraud cases. The new guy was a dull-looking public defender in a wrinkled blazer who'd clearly read the case file 30 minutes before showing up. Owen didn't make eye contact with me. My father looked irritated. My mother, for the first time, looked nervous. The judge called the room to order and went straight to the appeal. Rajani stood with the grace of someone who knew she held all the cards. Your Honor, before we address the merits of the appeal, we'd like to introduce newly uncovered evidence that directly pertains to the nature of this family's financial entanglements. She passed a copy of the folder to the court clerk. The judge began flipping through it. Mr. Henry Marshall was fraudulently listed as a co-signer on a high-risk consolidation loan at the age of 17, an action facilitated by his parents without his consent or legal awareness. We have included the loan documents, expert handwriting analysis, and a notarized affidavit from a bank manager who has since confirmed the application contains forged initials. The judge stopped flipping. Forged, she repeated. Yes, Your Honor. The initials used on the document belong to Mr. Marshall, but he did not sign them. We are submitting a counterclaim of financial fraud and identity theft under Section 530.5 of the Penal Code. We are also submitting evidence of ongoing financial abuse, including the unauthorized use of Mr. Marshall's identity for utility accounts, credit lines, and medical billing. There was an audible shift in the room. The air felt different. Heavier. The kind of silence that means someone's world just started collapsing. My father turned to my mother, whispering harshly. She looked pale, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Owen finally looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't sneer. I just looked back. Calm. Centered. Unshaken. Because this wasn't revenge fueled by rage. It was surgical. The judge's expression hardened. I see. And have criminal charges been filed? Not yet, Rajani said smoothly. But the district attorney has been informed. We preferred to resolve this civilly, but we're fully prepared to proceed otherwise. My parents' new lawyer stood up, stammering. Your Honor, we were unaware of these details. We respectfully request a continuance. Denied, the judge snapped. You filed an appeal claiming the original verdict was based on insufficient understanding of familial obligations. And now I'm learning that the so-called family in question engaged in active financial deception. She turned her full attention on my parents. Did you or did you not list your son as a co-signer on a loan without his knowledge? My mother opened her mouth, closed it. My father said nothing. I'll take that as a yes. The judge slammed her gavel once. This appeal is denied with prejudice. Mr. Marshall's counterclaim will proceed to arbitration within 30 days. Furthermore, I'm submitting a recommendation to the district attorney's office to open a formal investigation into financial misconduct. Court is adjourned. She stood and left before anyone else could speak. And just like that, it was over. But the real fallout? That came after. The story hit the blog within the week. The journalist had been kind. Names redacted, certain details blurred, but anyone who knew my family could connect the dots. The comments were brutal. People weren't just outraged. They were disgusted. How do you sue your own kid after forging his name on a loan? They sound like leeches. Glad the judge saw through the BS. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't need to. The court's ruling triggered a freeze on my parents' bank accounts while the arbitration process moved forward. They'd have to provide full financial disclosures. Every loan, every expense, every credit pull linked to my name. And because of the fraud findings, Rajani was confident we'd win a full financial judgment. Enough to not only remove my name from those debts, but to slap them with restitution and damages. And Owen? He tried to distance himself immediately. Sent me an email 3 days after the hearing. Said he didn't know about the forged co-signing. That he never wanted things to go this far. That he was just trying to get his life together. I didn't reply. Because the truth is, he did know. Maybe not the full details. Maybe not the paperwork. But he knew the kind of people our parents were. And he chose to ride that train anyway, right until it crashed into me. A month later, a mutual friend sent me a screenshot. Owen had tried to get hired at a local tech firm. Apparently, the hiring manager Googled him and found the blog article. His application was rejected. The friend included Owen's last message. I think my brother blacklisted me. I hadn't. I didn't need to. He'd done it to himself. I never filed criminal charges, though I could have. Rajani said it was my call. But after the arbitration ruled in my favor, ordering my parents to pay $134,000 in damages, legal fees, and the full balance of the fraudulent loan, I let it end there. Because I didn't need them in prison. I needed them to live in the mess they made. I heard they had to sell their house to cover the debt. That they moved in with an uncle who only agreed because he hadn't heard the full story. Eventually, someone told him. They were asked to leave 3 months later. As for me, I left the city. Bought a small cabin in the mountains. Quiet. Peaceful. A little messy, but mine. I kept my job. Still mentored interns. Still donated blankets every winter. But I also started writing. Not revenge stories. Not exposés. Just the truth. What it means to grow up unseen. To build yourself from broken parts. To endure. Some of it got published. Some of it didn't. But that didn't matter. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't writing to be heard by them. I was writing to hear myself. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the fog roll over the hills, I think about that courtroom. That moment when the judge said, "Did you or did you not?" That was the final fracture in their version of reality. The lie they'd built for years, shattered with 5 words and a silence they couldn't fill. And I realize that was my real victory. Not the money, not the legal win, but the silence that followed. The kind where nothing else needs to be said. Because finally, they saw me. Not as a son, not as a brother, but as a man they couldn't control. And that was the day I became free. The last thing my father ever said to me was, We didn't think you'd fight back. And the last thing I said to him was, that was your first mistake.